Hey everyone, and welcome to Tab Jam. So today I want to talk about how arrow functions change the meaning of the keyword this. And I'm willing to bet you've probably been taught this incorrectly in the past. So let's dive in. Okay, so let's revisit this code example that we've seen in the past few videos. We have a person, they have an age property, and they have a celebrate birthday method. And I have declared this method using sort of the old ES5 syntax of declaring a method, where I use the function keyword. And what this method will do when I call it is it will run this function here, and we learned in the past few videos that whenever we have the this keyword inside of a method on an object, this will refer to whatever that method is being called on. So in this case, this will be person. So it will increment person's age, and if we are to then look at what person.age is, we should see 21 printed in the console. And by the way, again, I'm using VS Code with the extension code runner to see my output in the terminal. So like I said, this is kind of the old way of writing methods using ES5 syntax. Let's convert this to the new way of writing methods in ES6 syntax. It's gonna look pretty similar. And I'm gonna again say this age plus plus. So check out the difference between these two. Really, the only thing I've changed here is that the function keyword is gone. Okay, so let's get rid of that. And let's see now if this behaves in the same way. We should again see 21 printed in the console, and indeed we do. Okay, let's take a look at what would happen if we were to declare this method using an arrow syntax, which is actually considered an incorrect way to write methods on objects. But for the purposes of this demonstration, let's see what happens. So I'm gonna say celebrate birthday is going to be an arrow function which increments this dot age. Now, if I again run this code, what would we expect to see in the terminal? Well, actually what we're gonna see is age is 20. Age has not changed at all. And the reason why is because when we use an arrow function on a method and an object, this will no longer be bound to that object. It'll actually be bound to something called the global object, which depending on which JavaScript runtime you're using, either a browser or Node, the global object will be in a browser window, or in Node, the Node global object. And just for the purposes of demonstration here, how we can access the global object in my code editor, which is running Node, I'm gonna say this.age equals 100. And then later on, let's console log person age still, but let's also console log this age, which is gonna be my global age. And we should see 20 and then 101. So we see that, in fact, the global age property has been incremented in this case. So this is considered an anti-pattern. We don't want to declare our methods using arrow syntax. Now let's take a look at a little bit of a different example here. We have a child object. It has a property toys, which is an array of strings. We have a method called sayToy, which takes in a single toy, and it will console log out that toy. And then we have another method called viewToys, which will loop over this toys and say, for each toy in this toys, I am going to try to call this.sayToy, passing in the particular toy that we're looking at on any given iteration of that loop. So what do we think will happen here? Inside of this method viewToys, what does this refer to? Well, we saw previously that when we use the sort of new ES6 version of declaring methods, this will still be bound to the object that it is encapsulated inside of. But what happens when we try to use the this keyword inside of a function inside of a method? Now, since we have declared this for each method using the function keyword, using the ES5 syntax for declaring a for each loop, this will not automatically be bound to the encapsulating object. In fact, let's see what happens when I try to run it. We should get an error, and we do. We get a type error. This say toy is not a function, because this, in this case, when it is used inside of a function inside of a method, this is actually referring to, once again, the global object. We would say in this case that this keyword at this point is out of scope. And honestly, there isn't really a great reason for this. This is just kind of one of the quirks of JavaScript. It's often one of the most complained about features of JavaScript. And now in the past, there were a couple ways that we could sort of get around this before we had arrow syntax. One way we could get around this is to capture the value of whatever this is outside of the for each loop. So typically you would see something like that equals this. So we're saving whatever this is equal to in this variable that. And then inside of here, we would probably see it used like that here to refer to whatever this is outside of the for each loop. Now that's one way that we would have potentially seen this sort of workaround. Sometimes you would see it as written as that, sometimes you would see it as like underscore this. So if you're ever working in a legacy code base, you might see this pattern and say, what the heck is that? Well, this is what that is. Another way that people might have gotten around this issue in the past is to take the value of this in sort of the outside of this function and make sure that that value of this sort of bubbles down inside of the function as well. And we can do that by binding the value of this from the outer scope to the value of this in the inner scope. So that's kind of method 2 that you would have seen used in the past. Now, since this was considered such a sort of bad pattern in the language for so long, in ES6, arrow functions were introduced. And what happens when we use an arrow function here to declare the for each loop instead of the old function keyword? Now, the inner this will no longer be out of scope. It'll actually be automatically bound. And here's an interesting one. Because we are using an arrow function inside of a method, what happens there in this particular scenario is that this keyword inside of the arrow function will be bound to one context outside of the context that it is currently existing in. That sounds super confusing, but basically what that means is that whatever this is inside of the for each loop will be bound to whatever this would be outside of that for each loop. So in this case, if I run this function again, we should see all of those toys, rattle, and bear logged to the console. Now I know these are some super weird patterns. If you've never seen any of this before and you're totally confused, that's totally okay. Just remember, if you get one thing out of this video, just remember, don't declare your methods on objects using arrow functions. Use this syntax here. This is sort of the new syntax for declaring methods on objects. Okay, I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to leave a comment below. Let me know. I will be happy to get back to you as soon as I can. And if you found value in this video, please subscribe down below. It helps me out a lot. And keep tuned for the next video in my OOP series, which should be coming out later this week. I will see you all soon. Have a good one.